everyone. Today we will have a panel discussion with a topic about how data centricity approaching are transforming the life science industry. This morning we had very interesting presentation with a focus on data with patient engagement, but also as he presented the work on around AI ML for target identification, for example, and this last talk around data quality. I'm Berenice Wulbrecht. I'm a Vice President Solution Enablement at ONTOFORCE, and today for the panel discussion, I have the pleasure to have 4 panelists with me. Then let's start with Ashwini Sondur. Then Ashwini, you are Head of Enterprise Data Global Informatics at Roche. You are passionate about shaping healthcare systems through data, service, and technology. And your professional mantra is to bring clarity and focus to complex project questions. We have Sam Khalil, Vice President, Head of Data Insight at Novo Nordisk. He has 15 years of experience in healthcare as healthcare leader and digital innovation. And he worked in different stages of pharma, preclinical, clinical, pre-launch of products. Gernot Weber, which is Head of Data Strategy and Digital Innovation at Merck. You have a background in physics. It's very interesting because most of the people at ONTOFORCE that are working on the course knowledge graph also have a physics background. And there might be something between knowledge graph of life science and physics. Before Pharma, you have worked around different industries, and now you are focusing on innovating clinical trials with data and digital. And last but not least, Philippe Marc, which is Executive Director at Global Head of Integrated Data Science at Novartis. Your team is developing tools to improve translational medicine, data analysis, and decision-making. You have been working on several global projects at Novartis, like, for example, the Clinical Data Lake, Data 42, or the Biomedical Research Data Strategy. Thank you for being here today with me. And we will start the panel discussion with the first question: why data centricity is important, and what are the biggest challenges in becoming or remaining data-centric? Who want to start?
I'm happy to kick off. I would take a moment for all of us here to reflect on the amount of data we are generating every second, especially in the healthcare sector. As we all sit here today, our iWatches, Garmins, Fitbits, everything, the phones that you have, we are all looking to gain insights and understand better our lifestyle, our habits. So consumer devices are one methods of generating huge amounts of data. At present, 30% of data generated across all industries is simply coming from the healthcare sector. And this trend is not expected to decline, but grow. Statistically, it's demonstrated that in 2 years from now, we will hit from 30 to 36%. What do we take from this? Data is not an option today, but it is a need by every single stakeholder that's part of the healthcare ecosystem. Payers, policymakers, regulators, us patients, HCPs, healthcare professionals, the organizations, we are all interested in understanding the data that's being generated. So there is no question around data centricity on the importance of it. The topic that I would like to kick us off with is actually, what does a data-centric approach mean for the healthcare system? Is it the outcome we are all seeking here together? Is it that collective outcome? And I would say centricity is not the outcome or the end objective. It is an enabler, it's a catalyst, an architect to help us collectively achieve the common outcomes we have for the healthcare system, which is improved patient outcomes, better population health, and sustainable healthcare systems.
Who want to react?
Well, I fully agree. First thing, clearly data are there to serve a purpose. The data are used for use cases at the end. And I would add, because I'm in research, so I'm more, earlier than the healthcare, I would just add that for us, it's the blood of the organization since ever, meaning that we have been data-driven since ever. And despite that, things are changing, have changed, are still changing very quickly. So we are probably going to discuss the fair approaches on the data governance, the enterprise data governances. And I must say that these things are really a key enabler. So it's obvious, of course, but to be honest, if you want to really win, you really have to think about what are my use cases, why do I generate data, and also be curious about things. Can I use the late stage data for the early, or the opposite? Can I use early things for my market strategy, biomarkers, precision medicine? For example, the digital devices are used in clinical trials since many years, also with animals, actually. We have smart cages used in neuroscience, and all these data are just serving a use case which is going to impact the progression of the pipeline for us early, and then, of course, well, drive all the things that you just mentioned for the healthcare. So exciting time, again. It's not new, but it's, again, always exciting to be there in the data system.
And maybe if I can add to what Ashwini and Philippe just said, is data centricity is not new for pharma or healthcare. I mean, all our approvals of our drugs are based on strength of data and benefit risks. So we shouldn't look at it as a new thing. It's more about how are we actually now harnessing the power of new technologies to put on this data, and constantly adding at least the patient value in it. So for me, it's a lot more about data and patient centricity. We can collect as much data in our watches. If no one is going to ever use it, why are we doing it? And I see this very, very often in industries where we have a push from top down to please collect as much data, please build a data mesh, data warehouse, lakehouse. But then when you ask the question, for what? This is where it blocks. So data centricity, yes, but for which value, for which patient, what are we trying to achieve with it?
Yeah, I agree with all of the statements which have been made, but want to give also a slightly different spin and view on top of that. I think we need a data-centric view because we are currently living in an era with application and technology-centric view, and I think it's not working. I mean, I don't know how many discussions I had and with people being obsessed about, I need to have access to your CTMS, I need to have access to your EDC, but they're forgetting the underlying question. The underlying question is around the data. How many patients have we enrolled in a certain trial in a certain country? And that is secondary in the end, but people are very focused on the application and to get access to it. Same for technology. I don't know to how many brainstorming sessions I've been invited recently to, let's use generative AI, yes, and yes, those technologies are going to help us to solve problems, but we need to take the time to articulate the problems in the first place and not start with a solutioning and then kind of try to reverse engineer. I love to do woodwork in my free time, and I don't buy a circular saw and then decide which kind of furniture to build afterwards. I try to understand what I'm trying to build and then try to get the right tool basically to get the job done.
Then I cannot touch the topic of data centricity without talking about FAIR. Philippe, you will also have a talk later today around LLM, the use of LLM for verification. Could we discuss a little bit about FAIR, how FAIR is important, why is it important, and how you drive that towards your approach?
And I think that one is, well, I mentioned before that we are on a long journey on data. I think FAIR has been really something that has been transforming the way we deal with data. There was already before data standards, there was already some ontologies, there was already all the semantic things that we want. But FAIR came as, well, first a philosophy, a religion for some people. And then it did bring actually a lot of tools that are useful to really get the things done. On a lot of work from, well, I will mention the Pistoia Alliance or the AMI FAIR Plus, for example, but there are many people who have been contributed some packages that are really helping to get the data in a fair stage. Now, do we need to have data in a fair stage? That's another question. I would say, again, focusing on use cases, as we just said, thinking about things that, like, I want to do something, very often you don't need to be fair. By the way, you can't be totally fair by definition. There are at least two criteria that you can't fulfill, I think. So at the end of the day, I think fair is a big deal, but for me, it's a way to get fair enough. That's what I would defend. You need to have enough of that so that you can work. Being totally fair is probably too much. And to be honest, well, it's So we may have abused of the fairness to explain to our management that we need data, and now we are trapped into promising that we are going to be fair, and well, it's not fair. Well,
You want to react?
Yeah, it just triggered a thought in me. How many times have we been in situations internally and externally within our organization, and also when we engage external stakeholders, when we talk about fair, we first think about the systems, the infrastructure, and how do we make it interoperable? We start with the I, the interoperability, before we think about what does fair mean. If there's one or probably two call to actions that I want us as leaders to take away from the day this morning is two things. For me, one is fair. Making data fair includes the culture we develop around it, right? What is the data culture we want to establish in our organizations? What is the data culture we want to embed in healthcare ecosystem? And the culture includes data citizenship, stewardship. As a data producer, it needs to become a mindset on how we are looking at the data as a producer, understanding who our consumers are, because that's going to help us understand what the use case and treat data in truly fair. And the second aspect of it is we often miss the processes. As we want to collect more data, we want to leverage all the innovation in technology. And what we often miss is the processes like governance. When we talk about governance, how many times have we been in situations like, oh, but you are controlling situation now. Now we don't invite a controlling mechanism. No, large volumes of data that we are generating definitely warrants us to have streamlined processes so that we can go out there and have the culture and the processes to enable us maximize the technology we bring. So please do not start with the interoperability, but let's first think about what is the culture, what is the processes. And there's like one quote that resonates a lot with me is it's a quote that Bill Gates said. He said, any technology works when you make it fit in, not as a thing, but it has to become part of everyday life. So when you have a new technology, the only way we can make this fit in is when we transform the culture, the mindset, and the processes involved, where technology is not, oh, we are here to do and discover what AI brings, but how is AI enabling us to leverage the needs of the data?
I agree on the culture aspect, fully agree on the culture aspect. I mean, even if we have now fully verified data available, I don't think it's significantly going to change anything direct away, basically. Yes, of course, having data findable is a good starting point. No, jokes aside. I think we should go on this journey also on a use case basis. If we now say we're going to vanish in our ivory tower and we're going to fully verify our data and we're coming back after 5 years, I think the ship has sailed and no one will listen to us anyway. So I really think it's a journey where we need to take everyone basically on board and start small and then expand basically. But by seeing the value of kind of starting with a verification of data, and it doesn't need to be like fair enough, it's entirely fine. I think only then we can take the people and get the buy-in basically on this journey to continue.
I think you also had tried to integrate, like, should we integrate everything or should we start somewhere? Like, what's the right strategy, right? Or...
Yeah, no, definitely. And I really invite you to go to the talk of Philippe in terms of fair enough. And you've mentioned it as well. I think there is a bare minimum to be had. Right now, some enterprise don't even know where their data sit. It's on-prem, it's not even on the cloud, you don't know the catalog of it. So there's a bare minimum horizontal that you have to do, which is, I can at least very quickly go and access this data. I have the right governance to have it in place. We should spend a lot of time just like nailing the governance at the beginning, because our biggest issues are not just finding the data, and we always call it like finding, but then you have to have a seamless access. If you tell them the data is sitting there, but it's going to take you 3 months of email and committees and boards now to get access to it, it's useless in the same way. So this bare minimum is needed as a horizontal, and then the value use case comes as verticals, basically, where I have my fundamentals, I have the platform, we are able to do the search. And now let's focus and deep dive in terms of the interoperability of the modalities for a particular use case. So if a use case requires imaging now and proteomics, this is when we start to connect those modalities together, but for it in particular.
Okay. And my next question will be like, what are the opportunities to bridge data across departments within the organization, and perhaps even how to collaborate across organization? Who want to start?
I can definitely continue on to that one, because it is critical that we connect the different parts of the organization. You've seen my colleague earlier today from Novo Nordisk on the research side. It is extremely important on the research side, basically with the development side, that we have a collaboration, that we don't have two different fare, we don't have two different ontologies, because it's going to just break, basically. Comes then after that, even market access in our commercial field. If market access cannot at least see some of the data and the right ontologies and the right even knowledge graph that we have, it's not going to work out into the organization. We're still going to create silos. One of the advantages we have at Novo Nordisk, at least, is the 100 years of experience in really focused therapeutic areas. So that brings us that we don't have this diversity of different types of modalities of data, different types of therapeutic areas that we need to understand. But we have to break silos between the groups that are within the organization. We won't be able to use any of the generative AI that we're talking about if we're just pushing the generative AI or the LLMs to just siloed data sets. This is going to be the future of it and how we connect it. Now, how do we do it? That is the bigger question, and that's the governance, basically, because no one has cracked yet. How do we make sure we have the proper governance at either the row level, column level, data sets level across an organization? And so I'll just finish with this. Sometimes we forget HR, but our biggest hurdle sometimes is the user still even in the organization? They switched department. They had access to the data when they were in this department, but they just moved to another department right now. The whole governance is broken if we don't know it from the initial, from that perspective.
Gernot, you want to perhaps comment on the across organization and collaborative framework?
Get the question?
You perhaps want to comment about how is it important to connect across organization to have collaborative framework? Like, for example, with the Pistoia Alliance, the clinical operation?
Clinical operations.
Clinical operations, sorry.
So the Pistoia Alliance, if you want to speak about it.
Sorry, we don't have the sound really well between us.
The acoustic is not ideal. No, I think there's a huge benefit we can have out of standardization. I'm a strong believer in standardization, and every pharmaceutical is claiming that our trials are special, and we need to have specificities basically in there. But in the end, we are all relying on the same concepts. I mean, most of the times we have starting with a scientific hypothesis. We very often also have a compound we would like to involve there, right? We have countries participating in the trials, and oh yes, we also need to enroll patients at some stage. All of those are the same things basically, and I'm a true believer that we can standardize this to a high degree, irregardless of the therapeutic area or the indication we are looking at. And we also recently kicked off with the Pistoia Alliance a project actually to look into unifying the execution of clinical studies. So things like site feasibility, for example. It's the same thing for all pharmaceuticals, but yet everyone is doing differently. Sometimes even within the same pharmaceutical, everyone is based on their own experience doing those things. And if we can really define basically out of the protocol, those are the things we need to check with the sites basically. This is the procedure basically. This is a knowledge graph basically showing how we need to do all of that. Also the collaboration with the vendors and CROs will be less ambiguous basically, and will take off a lot of the operational burden, and also will allow the niche vendors to kind of also support us in this journey, because for them usually the integration costs and understanding how things are done specifically in this company is very, very difficult. But if we have a common layer we can all agree on, I think it's going to make it a lot easier.
Okay. What is the place of external data within this? Then we had discussed about bringing data across department, aligning different ontologies and have a base across organization. But what about like bringing the external data? What are the challenges? How do you dealing with that?
Yeah, I can give it a go. So with external data, I'm in global informatics, but the last 14 years I have worked in pricing, access, worked intensively with payers, regulators, policymakers. And one of the challenges, for example, if you take the innovative access models, right? So as we started, this was years back when we started looking at combination therapies, multiple indication therapies, there was a need for us to sustain in terms of access and for payers to look at what does value-based pricing look like. And the situation is, we as industry partners, payers, we all see the benefits and we want to implement these efforts. But when we went to the ground, which is to the hospitals, that's where the realization happens, where the real world data, we have hospital systems, we have a lot of unstructured data that's in prescription notes, there is claim systems, many different systems. And even though these models get approved at a payer negotiation level, but when it comes to implementation, there are huge burdens. Despite the advancement in technology, despite the amount of data we have, we still struggle with very trivial challenges. To understand data, to get structured data from unstructured data. So bottom line, where we stand still today is we have lots of data, but do we have meaningful data? And here's where the big question sits. So back to your question, Bernice, like what are the options to bridge? I see that we as industry partners, we have a role to play. And here is, again, I'm going to go back to understanding what the challenges in the ecosystem are. Let's not bring in technology first. Let's not bring in the data collection first. Let's understand what is the ecosystem challenges. Of course, we need to have the big vision thinking, and we should continue to have that and advocate for that. But nevertheless, when we come to realization of these efforts, we need to understand what are our stakeholder pains. Yep. And collectively as industry partners, it can't just be us as individual biopharmas. And I think this has got really good in the last decade, where there are several different alliances that are coming together, even at the European level, even at many different levels with consortiums to drive these efforts. And I think that's very promising for us as an industry. To actually standardize and understand the pain of our consumers.
I would claim sometimes the external data is easier accessible than the internal data. I recall...
I would agree.
I recall running in my previous life a project where we wanted to extract protocol information. And the response was, no, you can't have access. This is a ground jewel. You cannot have access to the system. And we said, well, but this is published in public domain. This is common knowledge, basically. No. It's the classification of the system. You cannot have access. And in the end, it was easier for us to extract this in a structured way from public domain rather than getting it from our internal systems. Yeah. And I also think the external data, especially nowadays, is crucial for the success in future. I mean, diversity in clinical trials. We have not been very diverse in the past. So how do we think we can set up new diverse clinical trials if we are just looking at historic data? Of course, we need to enrich this with the external data to really ensure that we are answering the right questions.
To add to that one, so clearly, well, at least for Novartis biomedical research, our goal is to acquire the data that we need. By any way, any meaning that, well, we can generate data internally for the early, and we can also buy them. To be honest, very often, it's a better deal to buy them simply because the total cost of producing the data, operating the data, getting them the right shape and form, having the right governance and access is actually something that we are not able to compute. So right now, I can't tell you what is the total cost of ownership of any data sets. We are working on that. Well, actually, I could tell you for some of them, we are working on that, but it's really hard to get. On them, that's leading to that place where sometimes, yeah, well, I look at the portfolio of Novartis through the lens of an external provider, and I'm just, is it the right thing? On them, that's for the early. On them in the late, it's obvious that, well, there are plenty of things that you can't create. The real-world evidences, the claims, all the health economic outcome data sets, you can't create them yourself. So I think one of the big deals for any data strategy, and to come back to the point that we had before about consortia, is really to define what is competitive things that you need to have for yourself. And I would argue that actually it's not that many things. what is pre-competitive, things where you can create data with others, and what are things where you are just going to buy because it's not your business, or at least you decide that you are not going to invest there. And that's a good question. So you have just seen the talk from Elsevier. So they have an amazing collection of data, one of the best in the world. There are other providers in the room who are doing very well also. But the question then is, what should I let them do for me? What are the things that I need to see? And then, of course, then in the next level will be, how do I buy my data? Am I going to buy one line of data? Am I going to buy the whole database? What is a database these days? Can I have access to everything? And of course, the valuation framework for that is a big discussion with many companies, like we have seen also for publications since years after the open source publications came in. So a lot of questions about how to get the right data, on how to make sure that you get them in an effective way, which is saving resources internally, potentially getting them to the right price on a lower price, and then, of course, getting the right quality in the right timing, because timing is everything. Data too late means not useful for anyone. So that's a lot of things.
And if you would have one recommendation around like key action for the audience to take just between us around data centricity in the transformation or remaining data-centric, because it's not a one go, it's not a one shot, but it's a cultural change, it's a day-to-day effort.
Yeah, I think there's maybe two things, if I can.
Go ahead.
And you've heard us many, many times speak about the governance that's around it. For all the vendors in here as well, and for everyone, it's the tools we will need and require needs to be helping us in a seamless governance for this access to the data. It is a crucial part of it, and at least in our industry, in healthcare and pharma, we're dealing with patients' data, we're dealing with ICFs, that sometimes that patient, we can use the data for secondary use, but sometimes no, it should be per protocol only and for primary use only. These are the kind of the decisions that are sometimes blocking us from like fully expanding and fully leveraging our clinical data that we spend billions basically in terms of acquiring. The other part is how you organize your industry or how you organize basically your department. One of the things, at least for us at Novo Nordisk, is yes, we can deal with building a platform right now, verifying the data, making sure we have the data in the right ontology and etc. But if we don't fix the fundamental of how you're actually collecting the data in the first place, how you're building your first database, you're constantly gonna be in a catch-up. So we've put everything under one basically group that goes from the same department is doing how we're doing the ECFs, how we're doing the central data repository, all the way to the secondary use of the data. So you can align basically your ontologies from the creation. And I think otherwise you're playing catch up. And like I said about the silos, you're constantly trying to verify, but someone is collecting the data in a different way in the organization.
And I think another threat or two other threats are culture and politics.
Yeah.
I mean, we can come up with a beautiful data governance, but if we are still allowing people to kind of create a fake reality in Excel spreadsheets and PowerPoint presentations, and we are not basically insisting on taking the data from the systems where the data has been created, or at least has been kind of provided to extract the data, it's not going to work. There's always this backdoor basically, and people will infiltrate. And the same with politics. I mean, people love to be connected to the next big thing. And fixing the foundation is not necessarily a sexy topic. So for them, it's usually they kind of try to go on the fast track. They try to bypass the process, and they try to build a beautiful generative AI solution or something on top. And I don't think that it should be mutually exclusive. I think it's important to build those things to show people what you can achieve at one stage. I call it bimodal. I mean, like in software development, basically. It's almost like dangling a carrot in front of the people and tell them, look, this is what we could build, basically. But to really get this going in the right way, we need to take a step back, and we now need to build it correctly from the ground. Again, use case based. I don't think we can solve this by building the data foundation for a couple of years.
Definitely.
Ashwini, perhaps you want to add something? You already mentioned like two cores. You had two cores already.
Yeah, maybe to just summarize on this one. From my perspective, I see that overall healthcare sector, the adoption of digitization is at its inflection point. And it's not just us as tech industries or biotechs only, but every stakeholder in the ecosystem is interested, from patients to healthcare professionals to policymakers, everyone, right? Let's acknowledge that first, that we are not the only ones seeking at meaningful data. It's every of us, right? So I see a huge opportunity for us within the ecosystem to collectively join forces to actually drive towards data centricity. But it's not going to be a big bang. The reality is it's going to be little baby steps. It's like watching a baby grow, right? They learn to sit, they crawl, they stand, they bump and bang. That's how this entire journey is going to be. So let's acknowledge that and drive this as a collective leadership efforts through the industry.
Philippe, you want to add something?
Yeah, well, that's a lot of things to summarize. But so one thing that did strike me yesterday. So I was reading a report from, I believe, McKinsey, that you will find on my LinkedIn feed, since I liked it. And there was something there that that I've heard a lot the last year or so. It was written, hire less data scientists, hire more data engineers. It's not new. That's a trend. Everybody is speaking about that since at least 1 year. We see that actually in the strategic discussions in the pharma rooms, closed rooms. So it's really something which is there. So I think it's giving me hope that we're going to sustain. That's really what's happening. We're going to sustain that effort because, well, that's really, there is an understanding that we are at an inflection point. Again, we have to be careful. We are actually in a suite of hype things coming to us with curve of delusion. There is probably a plateau of enlightenment coming, well, Gartner now. I think we're going to sustain that effort on the data. And I believe there is no way out. The question for me is really who needs to do what in the ecosystem of everybody in the room here. So I represent a tiny bit of a system on, well, all of us who are part of that ecosystem. The question is who should do what collectively so that we get to the right place. And we just mentioned a lot of things that are suboptimal. We know where they are and we're trying to act on them. But again, it will take, well, I would like to say a few weeks, but I think it's a little bit more than that. It's coming.
Good. I couldn't leave the panel discussion without touching the topic of generative AI. It has been last year we barely talking about it, and this along the year it has been trending a lot. Hype or not hype, LM are not new, right? Large language models are not new to the scale this year. Yet it has been scaling largely. But what are the opportunities behind generative AI for today and for the future? What will be your take on that?
Yeah, I can get started. I think I'll focus mainly on the pharma industry. What are the opportunities in there? There are some obvious ones. Everything that is around document writing, I think the industry is like going full speed right now. We are spending way too much time in terms of simplified templates and having people and medical writers across the world just writing the same thing over and over in those documents. So I think this is going to be a place that we will need to really revamp completely the medical writing for documents. It's probably also going to be, if we can do it properly, all the way to submission documents. I think even regulatory submission at some point needs to be leveraging these models. There's other areas where I wouldn't say that LLM will be the groundbreaking, but they will help us focus our teams. So you said about data engineering, you said about coding, support for coding in pharma, when even we're doing an analysis, is going to be tremendous. So hopefully that we can calculate an improvement in the time until we get a request from our medical teams all the way to the time that we're getting the output from the biostatisticians shortened because they have the support of those coding skills. That is the power of those LLMs. Where they're going to fall short and where we're still waiting is more to have them trained on medical content and context. But not like Google, for example, is training their LLMs. It's really pharma context. And here is where I think alliances needs to be built. We need an LLM, for example, that fully understands CDISC, SDTM, ADAM transformation, protocol, statistical analysis plans, because that's what actually for the pharma industry will make it. We could all start doing it on our own. I mean, I can imagine you guys, and it's the same for me from top down. It's let's buy some GPUs and let's basically train our LLMs. But I think it would be a missed opportunity right now from that. And the last point I'll say, and I was discussing this with Philippe earlier, was we are now still in this point where it's infancy of, I mean, it's a pretty good infancy. It's a very popular kids in the block right now. But to productionize this effort is still not there. And we, at least for me, what I tell my team is, let's play around with it. Let's make sure we fully understand what could be the value creation. But let's be cognizant that we might have to throw away all of this in 6 months or 9 months from now, because Microsoft would have done a built-in solution or another company would have done it even better. And that, I think, is also a bit of a risk for the next few months. Yeah.
I also think that the value is probably the not so obvious things like code writing, like recently we ran a proof of concept where we were connecting an ontology with clinical operations data to ChatGPT. Now we can ask questions basically around this because it's generating the Sparkle query. I don't think those are the things people would like intuitively jump on. I think most of the times they're saying, yeah, protocol writing. And I agree that for coming up with the concepts for the protocol, it's going to unlock a huge value, but I'm not even sure whether we're going to write a protocol in future as a text-based format in the future again. I think the health authorities at some stage probably only will get and want to get a structured information basically, rather than a written text, which is less ambiguous in the end. So yeah, really think it's going to be transformative, but maybe not what people have in mind in the first place, but the secondary thing.
Philippe, go ahead.
Yeah, just wanted to add to that there are some LLMs, because we discuss large language models as a big bucket. So there are some things that are already used, trained in-house for production of compounds, proteins, peptides, and all that. So, and that's an example. There are a lot of applications that already exist that are something you can do in your corner in a way. And that could be actually something where you can gain a competitive advantage. Now, for all the things so we mentioned GPT, so let's continue with ChatGPT. I think that one actually is, first, largely pre-competitive. We should come together and try to see how we can optimize our processes to avoid the decline. In the talk from Elsevier, there was the price of drug, and now we are not so great at recovering the money. As all the pharma, all the biotechs, all the startups, we could gain some time actually. That means gaining something for the patients at the end, because we can get to the market and serve people. So we should come together. And there the question then is, baby steps, where do we start? And it's really about the danger. So do you put your baby across a volcano and see what's going to happen? Or do you really put something like really nursing care around? So the nursing care is things like I'm going to extract some data from a text or a part of a text. That is, at least at Novartis, we are pretty good at that. I will mention something about that. Gaetano is going to speak a full speech about that also on another track. That one is easy. Then when you go to summarization, so you have seen that Elsevier is there, many of our partners are there. Open Target in the public domain just introduced that 2 weeks ago. I'm not convinced yet. And it's down to how good you can vectorize your data. On that one, I can't even define what it means exactly to tell you. So that one is difficult. On them, there are the things that are just crazy. Are you going to give LLMs to your patients to interpret results from their critical data, healthcare data? Probably not right now, because of the hallucination, because of the fact that we don't understand what's going on. There are a lot of zero shots, so things where you put something in, it works, and you are, what? It works, but you don't know why. And then there are things where you do a 1 or 2 shots, so in the prompt, you explain, okay, that's an example, you have to learn from that. Doing that, even if you let the LLM thinking at minima, so with a temperature 0, so just don't think, just apply, you get fancy things that are some tricky things sometimes. So I think the level of danger we want to accept, the level of risk, is what we have to define. And then for a lot of these things, again, we need to think pre-competitive, which is not the interest of the vendors of CPUs, GPUs. It's not the interest of people who are selling models. So the question is, can we do it in the community? Because there is a need for that.
Okay, thank you for the nice discussion. Please join me in for this discussion. I think we are still on the journey towards data centricity. It's a continuous effort. We have definitively new opportunities that are coming ahead, new challenges. And thank you for the discussion this morning.